Where We're From highlights the rich textures, histories, and experiences of the Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi American community. Each episode is produced by students at San Jose State University.
During this period, Los Angeles was a small city that was known for being violent. Gang fights were common, and there were only 6 white officers protecting the city. One day, 2 Chinese gangs were fighting over the kidnapping of a woman, and the officers tried to stop them. However, a white civilian, Robert Thompson, got caught up in the middle of the fight and died trying to disengage the fight. The death of the civilian caused a massive lynch to occur, and that targeted Chinese Americans, resulting in the death of innocent civilians that wasn't even involved in the gang fight. This lynching was just the result of years of racial hatred towards the Chinese. Not out of justice for Robert Thompson, the death of him just gave people an excuse to act on the hatred that built up for so long. Despite the outrage among the small Chinese American community in LA at the time, this story never reached mainstream media.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Procrastinators podcast. The title for today's episode is Forgotten History, the Chinese Massacre of 1871. And the theme is like a wild card, anything, right? I'm Josh.
I'm Kevin.
I'm Angela.
I'm Trevor.
I'm Chuan.
Okay, and our first discussion question is what led up to the massacre, right? Like what exactly was the massacre?
So there were a lot of things that led up to the massacre, but I think specifically this one had like a major impact on it, and that was the news editorials in Los Angeles, so like Los Angeles Times. The racist attitudes towards the Chinese Americans were further encouraged by the news articles that were posted in 1869, 2 years before the massacre. Many of these articles included insults and pleas to not give the Chinese Americans any more rights because they think that they would use it to take over the white people. So as a source, I have the news article from February 1869 that talked about how they didn't want to give like Chinese Americans voting rights because they're scared that they would elect more Chinese Americans and take over the U.S.
All right, so from Kevin's research, it is from like when Chinese people started to immigrate to America. And that's very important because that's also kind of happening today, or it's been happening throughout American history with all these Asian immigrants coming to America, making a name for themselves, and all the Americans, specifically, white Americans, are like, oh no, they're taking over, right? And I don't want to say I can see and like it's justified. It's not justified, but I can see how Chinese immigrants coming to America would end up with would end in the massacre.
And it kind of had to follow up with them like coming over for the railroad, and some people thought they were taking their jobs, and it was just kind of building up that hatred again even more.
Yeah. I also agree that they had that hatred, and like I remember saying it's like they just needed an excuse to take action, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But even if it was like an accident or like he wasn't even supposed to be there or something, I don't know. But they like went off on the consequences for the Chinese people.
And I think other than like the pressure for jobs and stuff, and like the legal actions, like at the time wasn't really like helping this to smooth this out. It's like really pushing like for whites to like take action and stuff.
Right. So now we're going to discuss the aftermath and response, and specifically why wasn't it talked about more, right? And from my research, what I researched was the trial after the massacre, and in that trial, I believe it was 10 people that were convicted, but they weren't convicted of murder. They were convicted of manslaughter. And which is a less severe charge. It's a less severe charge, and the prosecutor actually was able to correctly charge the defendants with murder, but he couldn't introduce evidence that the person who was hanged, his name was Dr. Tong, was killed. And I mean, just another example of how like messed up the trial was that the prospective juries jurors, like jurors that could have been for the trial, were disqualified one after another because they belong to like a vigilance committee, right? And it's like that. It's like the vigilante movement in the city has grown so large that there's just random people on the streets belong to vigilance committees.
When you said that they were convicted for manslaughter instead of murder, I just thought, wow, it's like a parallel to Vincent Chen and what happened to him.
Mm-hmm. Just got off way less severe than what they should have gotten for murdering someone else. And also considering that there was a mob of about 500 people that was formed, which was 10% of like the whole population of the city. And they were just able to, they killed 19 Chinese, which was 10% of the whole Chinese population in the city. And they still only got off with manslaughter. It's just ridiculous.
It is.
And what's even more similar to the Vincent Chen case is that it's not like they serve, well, at least in Vincent Chen, his murderers didn't serve like a day in jail, right? These guys, they only serve like 3 years in jail. I think the max is like 6, but for like the lynching of 19, 17 or something like that.
19 were killed and 15 were hung.
Yeah, like that's insane. How do you only get like 2 to 6 years in jail for that? But you know, it's the anti-Asian hatred that caused that.
Yeah, so when you said vigilante committee or vigilance committee, like I read that the club or like the committee that was formed after the attacks were called like the anti-coolie club. I think that's what it's called. And they're basically the I hate Asian club, right? So they I bet that they were part of that, or they were a help in organizing that, because they basically wanted to make a clear separation of Chinese workers and white workers in America, and they wanted to like basically discourage Chinese businesses even in Chinatown. So
Yeah, it's like, you know, a vigilante is like they're meant to be a legal force when legal agency like not doing their job. But in what way is just being Asian illegal, right?
yeah.
In my research, as I was like researching for like the victims and notable figures involved in like the Chinese massacre of 1871, there was like a very scarce Asian American names available online, despite like the fact that like 10% was killed of the Asian American population was killed in the tragic event. Like the only name I found was like Dr. Jin Tang, who was a highly respected herbalist and a labor contractor who was caught up in the mob violence and killed. So I feel like this just goes to show how little media covers this to like the public, and like the tragic event wasn't even mentioned on like the local newspaper in the year end of a review of the major event. Also kind of helped to like show how like they're really putting like Asian Americans in like invisible part of the society.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was reading online that a lot of this event was not covered in many history books, right? They're like, I could say, dark chapters. And I was looking at a transcript of this podcast, and there's this doctor. She said that she went to UCLA as an undergraduate, Cal State LA as a graduate, and USC as a doctoral student or a PhD, but she did not have any knowledge of, you know, this massacre happening until she went to, she became part of a museum about Asian Americans. But I think it's like, it's crazy how she went through all that education and, you know, all that knowledge without knowing that this event ever happened.
And I think another reason for that is because the white people felt justified for their actions because they killed the civilian, and like they're the ones that are like writing the news articles and stuff. So they probably didn't see it as like a tragedy, but more like a victory for them.
I feel like another part that contribute to this was like, because like in LA, like the Chinese Americans were like silent after like this thing happened.
I think instead of silent, they were silenced. I feel like they're just too afraid to speak up or take any action after that because they didn't want they didn't want to get hurt, or they didn't want their families to get hurt.
They just lost such a big part of their community. They just didn't want to make it more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to build onto that, it's not only like Chinese Americans that lost hope. It was all the like white people supporting them, right? Because the prosecutor who was defending them, when he made the mistake of correctly charging the defendants, but he didn't introduce evidence. He never attempted to like retry the defendants. And then after a certain amount of time, the indictments themselves were like mislaid, right? So then no future trials could be held. And it's just like kicking a man while he's down, right? It's like that now they're just feeling hopeless. So why would they even try to attempt to fight back? And so then this is kind of like one of the major differences between Vincent Chin and this case is that after the Vincent Chin murder, the Asian Americans did fight back, and now it started the whole entire civil rights movement, right? It became the foundation, the blueprint for how to protest against the unjustful murders of people of color. And I think it just goes to show that like even when you feel hopeless, you should try and fight back.
Yeah, I feel like a big difference between those two cases is that like afterwards, all Asian Americans come together, and this part was like just for Chinese Americans. So the big difference in like the force.
I guess you could, yeah, there is like at this time there is a significantly less population of just Asian Americans in general, because I think of the Chinese Americans that were killed, I think it was like 10% of the Chinese population in Los Angeles at the time. And I mean that it's just you can't expect much from I don't know how to say this, but like it's hard to deal with that when 10% of your community is gone, and compared to like all the population of all the white people in Los Angeles, how are you supposed to fight back, right?
The environment also made it more difficult because this was like the time when they just immigrated, so like they had no rights because it wasn't defined in the Bill of Rights for like Asian Americans.
And I think like most of like the individual that were killed was like the one that just arrived from China at the time.
Yeah, and I guess this really is just another point in history where Asian American history has been forgotten and or covered up. You know, you see this with the Vincent Chin stuff. You see this with the Chinese railroad workers. You see this with the Asian American healthcare workers. I mean, it's just a continuing lack of recognition, representation, and it's just there's been nothing done, or there was nothing done previously to make sure that there is recognition. Whereas now, you know, we are fighting for the recognition as seen in with the Hollywood and cinema, right? Now Asian Americans are fighting for recognition, and it's important that we do. Well, that wraps up episode 4 of the Procrastinators podcast. For episode 5, the theme is just anything as long as you're bonding together. So we're not too sure about what we're gonna do then, but it will be fun.
Stay tuned and find out.
Woohoo.
Thank you for listening to Where We're From. This podcast is produced by students enrolled in Dr. Joanne Rondilla's Asian American Studies courses at San Jose State University.